Putin has had to go on bended knee to North Korea and debase himself to the North Koreans, which doesn't make him very popular in Russia. It doesn't look good for Russia.
In an attempt to prove that Russia is not a pariah state, Vladimir Putin is hosting, important countries, including China and India, at the three-day Brics summit in Kazan. Also there are a number of countries with shared interests: Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. So is this about a reshaping of an alternative world order, or is it really presentational? Let's talk to Sir Roderick Lyne, former UK ambassador to Russia. Hello to you, Roderick.
Hi, John.
Hi. So look, there he is, Putin, keen to show the West's efforts to marginalise Russia have not succeeded. Has he succeeded? Is he succeeding in that?
No, this summit is going to be much more hot air than substance. It's a talking shop. This is not an alliance. It's not an international organisation. That range from Marxism through Islamic theocracy to various shades of autocracy or even democracy. And it includes some countries that are very serious rivals, even adversaries. You've got China and India, who are rivals to be the dominant power in Asia. You've got Egypt, which is having a spat with Ethiopia, one of the new members of the group. You've got Iran on the one hand, Saudi Arabia and the UAE on the other, on opposite sides of the Middle Eastern divides. So this isn't a cohesive group, but it is a show by Putin to try to pretend that he's got more support than he really has. And we have to remember that almost none of these countries voted at the United Nations in support of Russia when it invaded Ukraine.
Yes.
They're not countries, for the most part, that actually support what Russia is doing there. And it doesn't fundamentally change anything.
Yeah, I mean, the big players there, many of the big players have a lot more to disagree about than to agree on. It would be a part of Russia's mission to try to persuade the BRIC countries to move away from the dollar as a trading currency. But is that pretty much a futile exercise?
Well, BRICS has been talking about this throughout much of its 15 years, trying to get away from the dollar as the world's reserve currency, try to set up its own financial institutions. It's made virtually no progress in that respect. The dollar still remains the most traded currency around the world. Obviously, trade between Russia and China now happens in yuan, but that's only a very small part of China's overall trade.
Yes.
So I think that is, dreamland for BRICS. And I don't think that all of the BRICS members seriously would wish to go along with it. I mean, would Brazil wish to move out of the dollar? I really ask that.
Well, indeed. I mean, there is, I suppose, work on the table there, which is of value to Russia, with or without the BRICS bloc of countries. I'm thinking of Russia and Iran and cooperation on defence, for example, and China's contribution.
Well, Russia has this small group of 3 countries which are providing it with direct assistance in its war against Ukraine. They're not actually working together as a group because they're very different countries. So Russia is getting huge numbers of artillery shells from North Korea. And in order to do that, Putin has had to go on bended knee to North Korea and debase himself to the North Koreans, which doesn't make him very popular in Russia. It doesn't look good for Russia. Putin has made Russia extremely dependent on China. And again, the historic fear of the Russians has been of becoming the junior partner of China, which is a country they've always seen as much more of a threat than a friend. And now Russia is again having to go on bended knee to Iran to ask for drones and missiles. The Russians have always had a very testy, suspicious relationship with Iran. They've had rows over the Caspian, rows over the Caucasus. And they never wanted Iran to have a nuclear weapon because that nuclear weapon will be very close to Russia. So you have an inner group that is really nothing to do with BRICS of those countries that for their own reasons are providing help to Russia. And 2 of the 3 countries, Iran and North Korea, are effectively rogue states or pariah states like Russia.
Right, so rather less to this summit than maybe meets the eye. Good to get your analysis, Roderick. Thank you. So Roderick Lyne there, former British ambassador to Russia.
Now, an interesting development into how the UK will fund its support of Ukraine as they defend themselves from Russia's aggression. For the first time, ministers have announced plans to use the profits from frozen Russian assets to bankroll the Ukrainian war effort. We'll get some more detail on this from Mark Hollingsworth, who joins us here in the studio, author of Londongrad, From Russia with Cash. Good evening, Mark.
Hello, good evening.
How's this going to work then?
Well, in essence, the British government is lending Ukraine £2.2 billion, so to help them with their war effort. And the deal, as announced by the government today, is that Ukraine will then repay that loan by the profits from frozen Russian assets. So basically overseas bank accounts, currency reserves, property, shareholding, assets owned by the Russian state abroad. And so the profits from those assets, Ukraine will be able to use to repay the loan. So the problem with this, in my view, is that, well, if these assets are frozen, where are the profits coming from? You know, if you have a bank account that's frozen, and they're saying that Ukraine can take the profit from that frozen bank account, where the government's not been clear about where that money's coming from, for where the profit's coming from.
Or whether the government pays itself back from the profits. Maybe they have access to it and Ukraine doesn't.
Maybe, but the government has not been clear today in their statement. I read the statement very clearly about where this profit is going to come from to repay the loan. And so, you know, the government's lawyers, I think it's very precarious in terms of international law. And the problem with this is that, you know, Britain is supporting Ukraine because Russia and Putin was a brutal and flagrant breach of international law. That's why Britain is supporting Ukraine. That's why Britain is funding Ukraine. But under this new scheme, I can't see, and they've not released any details, how the government lawyers have authorized this, because they're basically allowing Ukraine to basically seize, in fact, raid the bank accounts of the Russian state, take the money out, or the interest anyway,
and then use it
back,
to fight, to potentially
use it to repay,
Russians.
Well, exactly. But also they have to repay this loan to the British government.
Do we know how much interest is earned? So, I mean, the loan's $2.26 billion. Do we know how long it will take to get paid back?
I don't know how long it will take. I'm sure the loans are on preferable rates, but there are billions and billions of Russian overseas state assets in terms of their currency reserves and bank accounts and shareholdings. But those are frozen. And I don't understand, and the government needs to be more clear about, if you have a frozen asset, it's like your bank account being frozen by your bank, and then interest is accruing, and someone comes in and takes the interest. And that's what they said today.
Okay. The question then is how Russia will respond to this. At the moment, Russia is hosting the Brics summit. There were 24 world leaders in attendance today in Russia. It's the largest gathering of world leaders in Russia in decades. And these are the Brics summit stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. These are nations that basically want to challenge the economic and political monopoly of the West. So 24 leaders there today, including Vladimir Putin, who's just had this sort of huge, I want to say sanction, but it's not technically a sanction, but he's, you know, having to swallow this news today. How do you think he might respond?
Well, in the intelligence world, for example, if the British government expel Russian intelligence agents and throw them out of London and say you have to go back to Moscow, Moscow usually retaliates by expelling MI6 and British spies from Moscow, and they're thrown out of Russia. So usually there's an immediate response, and I have no idea, I have no inside information, but I think it's likely that the Putin and the Kremlin will respond by freezing, or Western assets that are maybe in Russia, or it's quite possible that there's going to be retaliation. And so, I think I understand why the British government is doing this, because Ukraine desperately needs the money to fight the war, and what Russia has done is horrendous, and Ukraine deserves our support. Yeah. But in terms of international law, I'm not convinced by this.
Yeah. Okay, so questions about that. What are we likely to see from the Brics summit? Will we see any significant developments from those nations in terms of, hammering into the dominance of the West?
Well, the result of the BRICS summit is that it will help Russia, because you have these non-aligned countries, North Korea, India, South Africa, and Russia is clearly using their trade relationships with these countries to accrue funds and revenue to fight the war in Ukraine. So this is the problem that Ukraine has. You've got these various countries around the world who are, in effect, are supporting Russia by trade deals and funding and buying Russian oil, and it's keeping the Russian war chest going.
Yeah.
And so this is, for me, this is a economic issue rather than a diplomatic or political issue.
And just briefly, the Defence Secretary John Healey confirmed today it was highly likely that a transfer of North Korean troops to fight alongside Moscow had begun. He was delivering the statement today on that loan for Ukraine, and he was asked about this or spoke about this. What is the reality here, briefly? North Korean troops stepping in to help the Russian war effort?
Well, if it's true, it's very disturbing. I mean, North Korea is the most secretive country in the world. So, but if the government have confirmed it, then obviously it's very bad news for Ukraine. But I suspect there's a commercial aspect to a financial deal has been done. It's my speculation, between Russia and North Korea. I don't think North Korea are helping them through any kind of ideological or principled reason. And I think this is all part of Putin's plan, where he's been sanctioned, and although the Russian economy has not been damaged, they still need alternative revenue, and they'll get that from trade deals with places like North Korea, India and South Africa.
Look, really good to have you in the studio. Thank you for joining us, Mark Hollingsworth. And you can read Mark's latest work in Agents of Influence, How the KGB Subverted Western Democracies. Good to have you with us.